Hi.
What's up, Griffin?
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. Hold on, let me see if I can get this to work right. What the hell? My Mac's little taskbar used to have a volume controller, and it's all like non-functional, and I don't know why.
Yeah, is it one of the new ones?
Yeah. It used to, like, when you tap on it, used to bring up a little slider, and now it's just a grayed out volume button, but it works fine. What the hell, Apple? What you do? All right, all good. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
So I'm doing this interview series for my school media. Pretty much
Yeah.
I'm talking to different people throughout the entertainment industry, kind of just getting their takes on what they do, how they do it, how it came to be, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I've given the spiel a couple times today.
Yeah.
So for starters, what is your official position at IGN for people that don't know you?
Okay, I am. What am I? I'm the EVP and Chief Content Officer at IGN. So I oversee anything editorial content, voice, video production, partnerships, anything that involves content, as well as marketing for the company. And and then have my fingers in everything else because I've been here for 20 years, work with the product and engineering teams on new apps and web experience, but also with the sales team on figuring out how to monetize the network.
So yeah, you were there from the beginning, right? If I remember that correctly?
Almost. So the actual IGN brand goes back to 96, and I joined in 97. And then the company, IGN, was founded in 1999. So I was one of the co-founders of the company, but I joined before as a writer when it was still part of a print publisher. And it wasn't, at the time, it wasn't called IGN.
What was it called back then? I want to say it was called Imagine, if I remember correctly.
So yeah, Imagine Media was the parent company. They're now called Future. And way back then they launched what is now IGN, was launched as a couple of websites. One was called N64.com.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to get into things a little bit, so the way I learned about who you are was through NVC, which, to promote a little, is one of my favorite podcasts actually to listen to. How did the podcasts at IGN start? Because I want to say it started with GameScoop, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, GameScoop was the first one, and I want to say it probably was because of some of the stuff the folks at OneUp were doing. I think there were some OneUp played around with gaming podcasts. There were obviously other bigger podcasts outside of gaming, but in games media, I think credit goes to OneUp for that. And Damon Hatfield and a few other people wanted to do a podcast, and so for us, that story started with GameScoop. And if you go all the way back, you'll hear Greg Miller and folks on GameScoop way back when, and the show was very different from what it is now.
Yeah, I've gone back and tried to find a couple of episodes. It's way different now than it was then, and that's kind of one of the things I like about this stuff is it's constantly evolving, constantly changing to fit the atmosphere.
Yeah, and obviously the idea of having audio programming is still a good one even today because people can now stream content through their phone or through their car stereo, right? Like you no longer need to be on the radio and you can reach people in their commutes. So we love that idea. What we did over the years was because it's very difficult for us to monetize podcasts. Like podcast advertising is, you're not going to make a living off it. And so we decided, hey, let's put the podcast in the studio here. First, we had them in a small room, the podcast room, and put a video camera up. And it's like exactly what Howard Stern was doing early in the days. Like, it's not going to look pretty, but if you want to just hang out and see us, you can do that. And so that actually took off too. And, we, I think last year moved the podcasts into the studio here, so they look a lot better.
Yeah, to comment on that quickly, I love the new look of all of them. It's a beautiful studio that you guys have there.
Good, yeah.
So I know you officially run NVC now that Jose is gone, correct?
Yep.
So what exactly do you look for when you are planning a podcast?
When I'm planning it?
Yeah.
So the topic selection, well, we're lucky enough now that that Nintendo is on the up, and that they've got a ton of new announcements. Every week, new games get announced, whether they're indies or major titles. New titles came out. I mean, you look at this week, you're like, NBA 2K just came out. SteamWorld Dig 2 is out in 2 days, right? Like, there are all these titles, and at the same time, you could continue to talk for hours about Mario, or you can go back to Breath of the Wild, or you can talk Metroid, which just came out. So, and then Mario plus Luigi is also coming out. So many games to talk about. So we try to distill all those different topics down into things that we think will appeal to our audience. Because quite frankly, there are certain things we'd love to talk about, but people wouldn't tune in for. And then when it's a lighter news week, you think about topics that are kind of the audience would be most excited about, whether that's talking about what the best games of all time are, or doing kind of like a history of a beloved franchise like a Star Fox or something.
Yeah, more evergreen topics.
Yeah, so we have a whole bunch of evergreen topics on the back burner, but because Nintendo's been just announcing stuff left and right, it's been difficult to even get to one of those,
Yeah, I'm sure that makes things fun.
But it's also, you look at the performance of the shows, and every week we can see the downloads in audio format or the video views, and you quickly notice that certain topics outperform others. For example, Splatoon doesn't do that well for us,
Really?
Even though I love Splatoon and would love to talk about it more, an entire Splatoon episode just wouldn't bring the numbers, so you have to have a good mix of content that more Switch owners would be into.
Mm-hmm. More stuff like the Bethesda stuff that just got announced, or Mario Odyssey, for instance, right?
Yeah, anything Mario, anything Switch, popularity, hardware sales, that kind of stuff does really well.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, based off that podcast alone, you have a lot of Nintendo knowledge. I'd say all of you do. Did that start just from experience with playing the different Nintendo consoles?
Oh, okay. Well, I grew up in the home computer era when the Commodore 64 and the Atari computers, the 800s and so forth, were popular. And I stopped playing for a while, but I got back into it in Japan with the Super Famicom, so the Super NES. I had actually ignored the NES era for the most part, just kind of played some games at my friend's house and said, hey, this Mario game is pretty cool, but didn't get into it. And so with the Super NES, I really fell in love with video games again, got back into it, really took to Legend of Zelda, Super Metroid, Mario, those core franchises, but also a lot of the Square RPGs. So then I became interested in it to a deeper level, where I started obsessing over the next game in the series or the creators behind those games. And so when I was in journalism school, I decided I'm going to create a fan site. And the moment you do that and you put your written word out there, the audience scrutinizes everything, and you gotta bring it, right? You gotta study up, you gotta learn more. And I think in those days, that's when I really kind of furthered my knowledge of Nintendo history as well.
Okay, to jump back, you said that fan site, was it just strictly Nintendo?
Yeah, it was only Nintendo. It was called Nintendojo, and it's still running. Somebody else is maintaining it. I gave it to the people, and it was just me in the very beginning on an AOL server, writing kind of feature-length stories about video games and doing a lot of paying attention to what was in the Japanese gaming press and translating some of that stuff. And so, people started to come to my site to get my take on things.
And so you said this was a fan site, so something of a passion project. Did that lead you to the people with IGN before it was called IGN finding you?
Yeah, so when N64.com launched, I read that site. There was also N64HQ, which was a fan site. I read all of those websites. I started emailing the folks who were running N64.com with corrections. Whenever they made a mistake, I'd be like, actually, And so, just kind of got to know them, and I think they recognized my name. But what most caught the attention of the crew at Imagine was I had this scathing editorial about Next Generation Magazine. Next Generation Magazine was an Imagine media publication, and they did a cover story, very poignant, very smart, actually. It was called What's Wrong with Nintendo 64? And it had a shattered glass image on the cover with Mario on it, and they were painting the picture that there was something going wrong with game support on the N64. And all super valid points, but being a super fan, of course, at the time, like, you guys are not looking at the positive stuff. So I wrote this counter editorial. There was something wrong with Next Generation magazine. Total punk move, and that obviously they noticed. And the editor-in-chief at the time was Chris Charla, who's now at ID at Xbox. He's the guy, whenever you see like a Cuphead presentation, he read my editorial, and instead of getting mad, he said, well, yep, you're right. And that was it. And so from then on, I had a pretty good relationship with that team.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, didn't think that would work that way, but hey, you never really know how things are going to turn out.
No, it's credit to Chris and the team that, despite my scathing criticism and being kind of like a punk super fan, they saw value in it, and they didn't say, hey, let's never hire this guy, right? I think I think it speaks to it speaks to their knowledge of the landscape, and that they were confident in their abilities.
Yeah.
Right? They rose above that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So kind of to jump on the criticism train, and you mentioned earlier, whenever you put anything about any game out there, it's going to get scrutinized. It's going to get a lot of people angry, because that's just how the internet is. How do you guys at IGN kind of deal with that?
Yeah, look, probably not as well as I'd like us to. I think to a lot of writers who are on the front lines now, it becomes very difficult to maintain a positive and healthy relationship with the audience, and that's because the content on our site is not compartmentalized, right? Like for a podcast, NBC, we post the video. Most of the people who land on the podcast page and actually listen or watch the content are fans, and so they will give you great feedback. Sometimes they're critical, but there's a positive spirit. They're there because they're fans. Whereas, like with a news story, if you write a news story saying the Xbox One outsold the PlayStation for the month of August, you're getting two fan audiences that converge you, and you deal with shoot the messenger syndrome, and it can become a very negative experience for a writer. And so with reviews especially, I had a Twitter exchange with some Xbox superfans today, and they're like, IGN is so biased against the Xbox. I'm like, where the hell do you get this from? It's like, well, Ryan in his review of Gears of War Ultimate said that the A button is overused. I'm like, okay, review from years ago. Number one, wasn't written by Ryan even. He gave it an 8.5, so he thought it was great. And that somehow is the start of a negative relationship with that writer? I just don't get it. And so I think depending on your level of patience, I think for a journalist or a writer or editors, it's difficult to kind of maintain that positive relationship. And then sometimes we go a little bit too far and kind of lose sight that the audience is so diverse that you're really only reacting to a splinter group of superfans. And so you got to be smart and see the good people out there too, and never lose your cool.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the Kind of Funny guys with Greg and Tim and all them, and they talked about this thing that I kind of liked. It's the silent majority, the people that are coming, watching your stuff, and then leaving it because they enjoyed it and whatever. That's definitely been something I've kind of been trying to think about with the stuff that I've been making.
Well, I think that's the challenge is, think about it this way. What's your favorite TV show?
Right now? There's a few of them. Right now, I just watched Defenders on Netflix.
Oh, Defenders. Have you told the director of Defenders how much you love that show?
No, I have not.
No, right? You'll tell your friend. And that's what happens a lot with media, too. Somebody will like a podcast like NBC, and they tell their friend, or, it's very rare that a happy customer will step forward and actually give you accolades, because it's a level of effort. It kind of feels like, oh, is it welcome? Is my feedback welcome or not? And so we rarely do that. And even though a lot of creators are accessible online now via Twitter or Facebook, few people actually take that step to give unsolicited feedback. But yeah, that doesn't mean that they're not happy and that they're not a valuable fan audience. It just so happens that when somebody's pissed off and upset, then that desire to share that and get that off your back comes forward, and people will step forward and give you feedback.
That makes sense.
I've never heard of pent up happiness.
I'd like to think that that's a thing, but
Maybe.
yeah. To move on a little bit, IGN is doing a bunch of stuff right now. It's all awesome news, reviews. One of the things I find interesting though is you guys have a TV show now.
Yeah, what the hell?
Yeah. Did you ever picture that happening before it actually happened?
No, that's really cool. So we did one season with Disney. So now we'll see if there'll be more, because for them it was a big experiment too on Disney XD. This XP kind of after hours gaming broadcast stuff. But no, it's crazy, right? It's just there's a Japanese version of IGN now, and I would have never dreamt of that. For example, it's just crazy.
Yeah, how many are there? I know Japan, and I know UK, and obviously the one in San Francisco.
It's 24 languages.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Germany, France, Poland, Japan, China, even Africa. We've got what do we have? We have Middle East. We have South America, Spain, Italy, the Norse countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. So yeah, there are a lot of editions of IGN.
You guys are everywhere.
Yeah, crazy.
So I have a few more questions. One of the big things I've loved IGN for is convention season, of always being able to get there for like the live streams and stuff. What all goes into that for those things? So
it depends on the event, but it's actually really time consuming and it can be a disruptor for us. So the weeks before E3, you can notice there's a drop in frequency of posts, there's a drop in quality of content, I'd say, just because we're getting ready for the show, we're planning, like somebody who produces content in the course of a week and actually outputs videos for you to watch will then be pulled into scheduling all these segments. And it's a full-time job. You're working for 2 weeks trying to lock down the run-off show. There's not a separate team that plans an event. I mean, we have one PR marketing / events person. And so when it comes to E3, just locking down the space, getting the electricity, the internet, the booth design, the booth builds, all the operations, running the live stream contents, syndicating it to all the different platforms from YouTube to Twitch to Facebook to Twitter, like all that takes tremendous coordination efforts. And then, of course, the moment you're live streaming content, you can no longer just, like someone like Brian, who's on NBC, as you know, can no longer just go to every booth on the show floor and play all the games. He's stuck in the booth and has to talk to people. So it becomes a very different experience.
Yeah, I can see that. Moving on to the last couple of my questions. This is a college thing, so I'm trying to figure out what do you guys look for when hiring people for IGN?
Okay, so I think the profile of hires has changed slightly over the years, especially in the content side. So first of all, the employment opportunities at IGN are obviously on the content side, so somebody on the editorial side, so people actually producing text or video content. They're on the tech ops side, so actually operating all the video stuff behind the scenes, streaming, technology, IT support, but also servers and technology. They're engineers, programmers. They're product managers and project managers, so the architects who work with the builders. There's sales, there's marketing, and then there's corporate overhead like finance support and that kind of stuff. And so there are a lot of different roles here. I'd say for the content side, which I'm assuming you're the most interested in, we're looking for people who are not just versed in one medium, but actually can be multimedia and cross media. And so somebody, if all you do is write, and your resume sits in a stack with someone who can write and connect with audiences through video content or even video edit, which is awesome. We call these people predators, producers / editors.
I like that.
Yeah, no relation to the monster. They will always be at the top of the stack, right? And when we gather applications for a role like the Nintendo position, there's a stash this big of resumes, and so it's all about what you do to stand out. And I don't mean like stunty, crazy colors on your resume, but really kind of what unique samples do you bring to the table that make you look different. Like a review of Paper Mario 1000-Year Door is not going to get you noticed. Anyone can write something like that, but is there a counterpoint or a valid opinion that makes us take notice. And then honestly, I mean, I wouldn't underestimate personality and the ability to pick the right angles on topics. So good example is news writing, right? Anyone can pick up a press release and with some training and a little handbook that tells you how to organize a news story, turn out a competent news story. But the people who will take that news story and develop a unique angle and say, hey, I would like to do a follow-up piece that's going to be this and this and this and this. That's what's ultimately the most valuable, and we look for that in our hires.
So you mentioned resumes. So kind of what do you guys do with resumes? Because I know everybody's different.
So what we like is a cover letter that tells us a bit about you, and that's where you can put information about whether you've worked in retail before, and so you're a great person at, on the customer service level, you're very personable. You put all that in a cover letter and you explain a little bit who you are and why you would be the right person for the job. Then there's the resume, and we prefer a one-pager, not padded with anything. If you did some social work or something, that's great, but that is not applicable to a job at IGN. So leave that in the cover letter and focus your resume on what could apply. And then it can be anything in the creative space, it can be something in the technical space that helps. But super important to have in that resume that you applied yourself online and you have experience in the sector. And I'd say that's something to work towards even before you apply anywhere. Try to get freelance gigs, write articles, unsolicitedly send them to news editors and features editors and say like, hey, would you like to run this, right? Just to kind of establish the channels with people and try to get some good stuff on your resume. The third thing is the reel or the samples. So this is where you have 3 killer articles or a link to a YouTube channel or a curated playlist of your best stuff that you created. That is super, super duper important.
Okay. One of the last questions I have, just kind of just a general, we're all college students watching this, or at least that's my audience. Any general advice you have for people going through college?
Any general advice? What?
Any general advice for people in school right now?
Any general advice for people in school now? So it's been a while that I've been in school. I graduated from Gymnasium, which is the German high school equivalent, in 1990. So it's been a while. And then I went to college, and then I went to university. In high school, I was a big slacker. I wanted to do many things, but not study. And in hindsight, I find I'm kind of angry at myself, and I find it confounding that I just ignored certain subject areas. Like, I decided I don't like math, so I'm not even going to try, right? And so I think it's just, it's difficult, I think, when you're an adolescent to know what will matter later in life, and I just wish I had, stuck to certain subjects and just kind of bitten the bullet and said, when I come home, I'm going to finish my classwork. If I don't understand something, I'm going to speak up and I'm going to try to catch up, and I'll do the best I possibly can, because in the end, I leave this place and I take with me what I learned, and it's very difficult to pick that up later in life. And then once you're in college, just making sure that you really play to your strengths. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was always I was a good writer. Again, my native tongue is German, so I wrote only in German, but was getting pretty proficient in English as well. So I thought, okay, maybe I want to do something with literature. I want to do some creative writing, and so knowing your strengths and what you love to do should be the path to figuring out what you will do someday. And that might not always be possible, but I managed to make my hobby my job, which I'm very happy with. And you have to just kind of get to this point where you can actually pinpoint that, what is it that you're strong at, and how can you build on that and develop it. Now, if I went back, I took, when I was at UC Berkeley, I took some classes in linear editing. So this is before digital, wonderful Premiere editing. We had these machines with 2 giant knobs, and you had to set in and out points, and it would physically copy footage from this giant Betacam SP tape to another one and assemble your news pieces. And that was a really valuable skill But it was also important that I quickly followed up and learned the new editing tools like Premiere at the time, Final Cut Pro, and I would put Photoshop and Illustrator, some of these other apps in the bucket. If you are at all artistically inclined, don't wait. Take classes, learn all this stuff, because if you can hit the ground running with video editing, there's such a need for people with that skill set, especially in the Bay Area and in LA. If you have that, and you're a great writer, and you're a good personality, the jobs will quickly fall.
All right, well, that's everything I have for you. Where can people find you online and stuff like that?
People can find me in San Francisco at 625 2nd Street at the IGN headquarters. We open our doors every first Friday of the month. So if you want a tour, just kind of follow us on Twitter and see when we announce those. There are limited tickets for those, free. And we do AMAs on how to get a job in the industry as well as part of that first Friday. But you can find me on Twitter. It's just Peer IGN, Peer is P-E-E-R. And anywhere where there's IGN, I will be.
All right, Peer. Thank you very much for your time today.
Awesome, Griffin. Have a good one.
You as well.
Bye.
Bye.